Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, good. Welcome. It's so good to see so many of you here today at the tail end of the book festival. So we've got a big topic, big questions, questions that people have been asking for hundreds of years and researchers have been trying to figure out. What is human consciousness? What is thinking? How do we measure it? How do we know? How do we know we're thinking about thinking? All kinds of interesting questions, and we've got two of the world's leading researchers on this to talk about it, and luckily they agree with each other. So this is not going to be a debate. They're going to each present their books for about 15 minutes, and after that we'll chat a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions from you. So I'm going to start by having Professor Dehaene give you a little bit of a presentation about his book, and it's fascinating. It's about consciousness and measuring consciousness. He's come up with some of the latest ways that neuroscience can actually measure human consciousness, and he's going to tell you about that first. So I'm going to let him do that.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. And thanks to the Consulate and to the Boston Book Festival. The topic today, of course, is a huge one. Is science legitimate to address the problem of consciousness, or is this a bridge too far? Is consciousness beyond the reach of science? When you are among neuroscientists, my fellow colleagues often think that consciousness is the holy grail, something you do after retirement maybe, but not when you are my age. And there are, of course, several objections to there being a science of consciousness. The question, of course, is whether neuroscience is limited to objective events at the brain level, whereas subjective experience, therefore, should escape scientific investigation. And there is a very big difficulty also in this field, which is that we all have dualist intuitions. It's not just due to philosophers. It's not just due also to religious systems or to legal systems that make us feel there's something very different to free will. It's a very basic intuition that we all have that, for instance, our mind is special, that our mind flies away in dreams, as was already painting in the Lascaux cave 18,000 years ago, the idea that when a person is dreaming, the mind flies away as a bird, and which has been painted so many times and represented in so many cultures. We all have this intuition the mind is special, and it's very hard to see how it could be attached to the body. We blame this idea to some extent on René Descartes, but because I am French, I would like to defend René Descartes. There's been a lot of Descartes bashing these days with Descartes' errors and so on. I'd like to submit that Descartes was actually one of the pioneers of the science of the brain and mind. And if you read Descartes, as I did, you will see that he was really a materialist, was trying to explain a lot about the brain in terms of a machine. Respiration, waking, sleeping, the reception of light, sound, odors, retention of memory, external movements follow in this machine simply from the disposition of its organs, as wholly naturally as the movements of a clock or other automaton follow from the disposition of its counterweights and wheels. So Descartes tried to be a materialist. He tried to explain vision, action, memory, even wakefulness and sleep in terms of the machine. But he had to appeal to dualism because he was honest. And he couldn't see how this machine could do flexible speech production, could have flexible behavior, the sort of things that precisely, as we will see, we attach today to the higher levels of consciousness. But I think cognitive science is beginning now to be able to address this issue. So what's new since Descartes? Well, for one thing, I think one of the key ingredients to the science of consciousness that I am trying to expose in this book, Consciousness and the Brain, is the notion of minimal experimental paradigms. We are able to play with consciousness in the lab. And here are some of the paradigms: masking, binocular rivalry, attentional blink, that can all be used to make pictures disappear from your consciousness at will and reappear, so that consciousness can be turned on and off, and we can measure the consequences at the brain level. I'd like to try a little demonstration for you. I hope this will work. So I'm switching to this software, which is actually the one that we're using in the lab, even last week. And it will come in a second. You will see a fixation cross that you have to look at. Here it comes. And then on the periphery, I will flash a digit, very briefly, but you'll see it. And then there will be a delay, and then there will be letters. And this is the exact disposition we use in the lab. So if there is a long delay between the digit and the letters, I hope you can see this digit very quickly, very clearly. Although it's brief, like it's 4 here, or 6, I hope you can all see it. But now we make the delay shorter and shorter between the digits and the masks. And at some point, it'll be so short that the phenomenon of masking will appear, and I hope it's the case now, that I swear to you, I didn't cheat, the digit is still present there. It's appearing in your retina. It's what's called a subliminal image. Don't sue me, you're all being submitted subliminal images. That's exactly how we can play with this. You know, sometimes the digit will appear in your consciousness. Some of you may say, oh, I just saw it, but most of you don't, okay? So, just a second. I just need to go back to this. Here we go. So, well, here are actually the 2 other ingredients that we use in the lab. One is focusing on very simple things. That's what we call conscious access here. The ability to perceive or not perceive an image. We are constantly bombarded by images all around us in this room, for instance. There's plenty of stimuli, but only one of them at a given moment makes it into our consciousness. This is a very simple meaning of consciousness. We may start with something simple, this problem of conscious perception, and later on build up towards the bigger problems of self-consciousness or attention or vigilance. So that was essentially Francis Crick's big idea. Let's start with perception as a model for consciousness. The third important ingredient is quantifying introspection. In this paradigm that I just showed you, I can ask you on every trial, did you see the digit or did you not see it? If you see it, you can click a button. If you don't see it, you can click another button. So we can sort the very same stimuli as a function of subjective experience. This is, I think, something rather new for experimental psychology, the idea that subjective perception counts, not because it gives us access to the mind directly. You cannot introspect about how your mind works, but you can introspect about your experience, and this is in fact the defining feature of experience that we will correlate with brain activity. So we sort our trials as a function of subjective experience. Now, with all these ingredients, all we have to do, and of course that's a big all, is we can measure brain activity. And you all know this has been a revolution in neuroscience. We can now measure brain activity thanks to functional magnetic resonance imaging. We can measure it through electroencephalography, magnetoencephalography. We can measure the small currents that are generated in the cortex when we think. We can also even use intracranial electrodes in some patients, epilepsy patients, that have electrodes inserted deep in the brains for clinical purposes. We can use these recordings to ask about consciousness. And finally, we can even use these recordings in my little nephew, for instance, on the left, to ask whether he's conscious or not. And of course, there is a big clinical problem. Can we use these recordings to ask whether a patient who is recovering from coma is already conscious or not? That's very much what we are doing in the lab right now, correlating conscious or unconscious reports with brain activity. And what did we find? Well, the first thing that we found, and I'm summarizing in one slide a lot of data, it's way too short, but what we found is that unconscious processing is extensive. That digit that you didn't see not only got on your retina, but it got into your visual cortex. It got very deep into your cortex. It was processed all the way to meaning. It was even biasing your responses for a few seconds, even though you didn't see it. Subliminal processing is extremely extensive. For instance, in this slide, we're showing the responses of the amygdala, which is a structure deep in the brain, which is responsive to fear. And if we flash you a word that has a content of fear, such as the word rape, for instance, your amygdala will activate quickly, subconsciously, even if you're not aware that there was any word at all. So there is a lot of subliminal processing in the brain, maybe 90%, 95%, we don't know, but a lot. And the flip side is that something special happens on those conscious trials.